Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, February 15th of 2022, where two laypersons, a pastor and an academician, gather for about 45 or 50 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. And this Sunday is February 20th. Each Tuesday we call in from wherever we may be at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And for our friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, that's 5:30 a.m. Our little team's working to be faithful to Lectionary Year C, and that puts us in the Gospel of Luke on Sunday. And we hope this discussion will provide areas of focus and reflection. Here's how it works. We develop perspectives independently after the leadoff person shares some formative questions. And then in this virtual discussion room, we share and we encourage and we challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Bill Hall, St. Petersburg, Florida.
Charles Willard, Minnesota. 9 degrees Fahrenheit.
And I'm Don Upton. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Sarah Mickelson's going to be our lead this day. And before she begins, let me do a quick introduction. Sarah was raised on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, attending small Presbyterian churches in Ocean Springs and Goshen. The middle child of a teacher and an engineer, Sarah grew up loving the power of great stories and figuring out how things work. And these two somewhat divergent interests led Sarah to a BFA in theater and a lifelong career path in connecting people with technology. Sarah attends Palma Fear Presbyterian Church as an ordained elder and has taught Sunday school to all ages. She's married to Art, and together they parent 2 young children. Sarah spends her days disguised as a law firm bookkeeper, but is truly just a child marveling at the holy connectivity of all things. And Sarah, we're glad you're our lead today. We can't wait to see what you have in store with us. Hello, my friend.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited about this passage today. This is a continuation of the conversation we had last week in the book of Luke. So we're still in chapter 6. We're looking at verses 27 through 38. Jesus has talked about the blessed are those who are poor, hungry, and separated from their society. And now Jesus gives us direct instruction about how we are to live. And I see this as the language I'll use as instruction of how we're to relate to each other and how we are to work together. Starting in verse 27. But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you, and if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies. Do good and lend. Expect nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put back into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. And that ends the reading of our scripture. Wow. You know, this is an interesting shifting of how we understand the law. if we were to extrapolate from these words. So I went thoughtfully back into where would the original listeners, where would they be hearing the law? What would they be using to base their decision-making and their sense of justice? And it seems like it came from the Code of Hammurabi and the Book of Exodus would be the two locations we would see the law being given. They both provide rules and laws for retaliation, retribution, and reciprocity, which were and still seem to be guiding principles of most social structures. As we are still in Epiphany, what was hidden but now is revealed by these new instructions given by Jesus? That's my first question. And I'm going to go to my friend who's an attorney. Don, what do we know about this? What was hidden and is now revealed?
I think there's a fine line between something that's hidden and seemingly impossible. At least my experience, they get mixed up together. The full bore application of what Jesus is talking about seems to be impossible. It's better as a mix, it's better as a consideration, something that you might mix into daily behaviors. So it seems so impossible that it's hidden. It's nice to do. It's appropriate. It's good behavior. We all agree it's good behavior. But there's just a few things come out to me this week. First one is that when I'm thinking about the questions you've raised, the ability to engage in this thinking and in the action is everywhere. It's a theme of every piece of reading and sermon and performance that I've been to the last few days. And so just reading it, putting it before myself, puts me on the spot to think about it. The next is there's no wall between the human judge and the person being judged, and that's the hardest part, I think, that no separation here, that the code, the laws sometimes build that kind of a wall where it's hard to see my brother or my sister. The next is the need for a well-ordered society is not built primarily on a code of enforcement. That's the most revolutionary part of this when I read it. We think about the code. You follow these things. If we all work together, we're going to have some sense of order. And I think Jesus is saying that's not the foundation at all. That is difficult. That is difficult to swallow. Third is our culture and our code does include a line of vengeance and suffering. Whether you're reading Abraham Lincoln or Oliver Wendell Holmes, it is a part of our common law history. It's a part of our jurisprudence, and that there's an expectation that what we have is well-ordered vengeance, well-ordered suffering. It is as hard to look at that as it is to try to think about how we flip this over to follow what Jesus is talking about. But I just wanted to highlight, a beloved leader like Lincoln actually writes and thinks about how we can use vengeance in an ordered way to accomplish good. That is the world that we live in. We're taught to retaliate and celebrate and delight in the unregulated avenger. That's part of our culture, not just the American culture, but setting things right and removing from the community the person who is threatening is in a very shallow way set up as something that is good and entertaining. Taking people to the edge of the cliff and threatening them or throwing them off. I'm highlighting what was done with Jesus in his old neighborhood. Take him to the cliff and threaten him and throw him off the cliff. Let's do a responsive statement here. I'll put this out for Sarah, you, or anybody on our team. Hello, my name is Ennio Montoya. You killed my father.
Prepare to die.
Prepare to die. Ha ha. Ha ha. That's our avenger. And then finally, I'll go back to Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said that the law ought to make the gratification of revenge an object, corresponding with the actual feelings and demands of the community. If people would gratify the passion of revenge outside the law, if the law did not help them, the law has no choice but to satisfy the craving itself and thus avoid the greater evil of private retribution. Now, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that, but I'm holding up that is, in the old order, as good as it gets. And the flip that Jesus is making is that in the specific relationship, in the specific, is where we can see the real gospel action. So I'll stop there. My intent was to raise the complexity of what we're, I think, trained to do in our culture. And I can remember as a child, what is acted out by the adult is as much about the well-regulated vengeance and retribution than it is about the golden rule. Sarah?
I by two thoughts. I want my pound of flesh from Merchant of Venice. And secondly, my name is Legion, for there are many of me being thrown back into the community. Bill, what do you think about this? When we are looking at this law that we're contrasting with what Jesus is offering us, what was hidden but is now revealed by these new instructions?
First of all, thank you for this question and the other two. As we noted in our pre-recording conversation, you, again, stretching us. With all three of your questions, I was reminded of something I heard years ago. I have no idea who first originated this, and it's a quote that I've used at times in my own meditation and in sermons. Jesus meets us where we are, but never leaves us where we are. I find that has to me the ring of reality. Jesus meets the people where they are. You know, he says that you have heard it was said, but I say to you. Okay, that whole dynamic. So you're asking what is revealed in Epiphanies about seeing something. For me, it is that Jesus goes beyond just non-retribution, which I understand the codes and there tried to be limits, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. There has to be some corresponding justice, and I think that's a principle in our court system today, that the way I respond to a threat must be in some way commensurate with the level of threat that's coming. So what's revealed is those codes are good, but they're not enough. Or perhaps within them, there's an invitation to a journey to go further. And Jesus really leads us further. Mark Davis picks up on one of the verbs in this passage that we translate as forgive, but he notes for us that it can also mean release. There's yet another verb in the Bible that can also mean release. I find that helpful. If I'm clutching something, I'm using energy to hold on to it. If I open my hand and release it, I'm no longer using that energy to just hold on to something. Obviously, easier said than done. And another mantra I've read in the last decade or so in counseling literature, don't let someone live rent-free in your head, okay? If you let them hold on to your mind, I like that imagery. They're living rent-free in your head. And another mantra, if you can't forgive someone for his or her sake, at least forgive them for your sake. And we've seen some dramatic examples of horrific crimes, and a member of the victim's family will say to the perpetrator, I forgive you. I'm letting go of that. That's not condoning. And the whole other subject is, if I forgive you for something, that doesn't obligate me to trust you. You may still be capable of hurting me. And to your reminder, Don, about, what was it, several weeks ago, Jesus being led to the edge of a cliff, I think what enraged the people then was, and I think it's true somewhat in this passage, often those who most quickly understand what Jesus is saying are those who are considered outsiders and foreigners and aliens. The Good Samaritan, the hero of that story, is a foreigner. Jesus, in his sermon that nearly got him killed, refers to non-Jewish people who acted appropriately. I'll stop there. Again, my mind swirls with a lot of thoughts. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I like the consideration here is we get, I think, entranced or enthralled with the retribution and forget that a curious set of circumstances led somebody to do whatever it was that has caused the offense. And I think we want to make shallow our understanding of the other so that we can justify not having a code of law that is merciful. I spent some time thinking about that we spend a lot of energy diminishing the threat by making it two-dimensional instead of remembering that a human being is on the other side of this equation. And human beings are not two-dimensional. So that's my first thought about this. Charles, do you want to throw something in here? Do you have anything to throw in?
Oh, yeah, I'll contribute a personal experience that is a process for me that it's a process for me. Well, one of the things that I have discovered is that in the particular circumstances where we are, which is being in Minnesota where it's cold, I've already mentioned, it's still 9 degrees Fahrenheit here right now. But we're also without a car. And what I've discovered is that means that we basically spend 98.7% of our time in the same building, encountering the same people, and they're there all the time. And I realized that I'm not perfect, and that's a hard realization. And in this case, there are two people in the community that I find I experience as being very difficult, as being obstinate, as being pushy, as being controlling. And as I think about those people, every time I pass them in the hall or every time I see them in the dining room, I'm the one that becomes frustrated. And I realize that I've got to find a way to recognize them as human beings who are also sinners like I am, and that it's the like I am that's important to recognize, and to think about how I can overcome my antagonism that simply rises every time I see them in the hall. It's a recognition of my own infirmities, my own lack of care for them, and the recognition is important, and what I do about it is an ongoing process.
Thank you,
I
Charles.
want to mention, while we're on this place, because I noted it and I wasn't now sure where it was going to come up, but I was looking at, the interesting thing about these Bible, this work with the Bible and the text of the Gospels, words that have been there for at least as long as I've been alive and knew how to read, that I never saw them before. And the one that I want to mention right now is down in verse 35. The last phrase there, he's talking about love your neighbor, love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be the children of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. That's a pretty generous observation. And I don't think we often think about that. We think that he's got some people that he's are really going to get roasted. But it said he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Fortunately for us.
Amen. So I'm going to offer up that these are instructions on how we're to interact with each other. I'm struck by the language, for those who are interested in continuing to listen and act, which is the opening. Jesus offers this radical counterposition and action to the laws of the day, which prescribe retribution as a response. This is how God's grace is presented, and is begun to be understood. And I can see how this would feel like a threat. Because people would start to extrapolate and look at this disruption in the social order and think of it as a threat, which is kind of terrifying. Because if you're going to live with a perspective of kindness and justice being merciful, not retaliatory, there's a whole lot of people whose structures of how they make money, how they control their position in society, all of those things are threatened by this. And so I'm looking at this from a new perspective, and I'm anxious because that probably means that when we do something that is framed with these words, people might respond to us in the same way. So verse 31 presents us with a challenge. This is my second question. The golden rule is commonly found in most cultures and in most languages. How does Jesus change or shift this common rule that we see in verse 31? And what are the implications of this change? Bill, you want to start?
Again, thank you for the question. I noted with question 1 that Jesus goes beyond non-retribution. Here, as various scholars I read this week say, Jesus goes beyond reciprocity. It's yet another step in the journey. Tit for tat is not enough, Jesus says. That's a part of life, and there's something to be said for that. An interesting poem that I was introduced to before, and I'm not an expert on this poet, but Edwin Markham wrote a poem entitled Outwitted, and it's just 4 lines. He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle and took him in. Now, that may not be considered great poetry, I don't know, but I like that title, Outwitted. I like that kind of play on words. To outwit somebody, to me, means that, okay, these seem to be the ground rules, but I will somehow outwit you. I will find a way to get around what you're trying to do. And I think something of the gospel is in the last two lines. He doesn't say, I had the wit to win. He says, love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle and took him in. I think the gospel there is that on our own, what Jesus is asking is impossible. We need something beyond ourselves. As I've noted a number of times, I was introduced to the 12 steps of AA as a young student in seminary, and have prayed the Serenity Prayer almost every day since then. And that sense of a higher power. We need something more than our own will and determination to do what I think we're called to do. And the other thing, the challenge, Sarah, again, various scholars have noted this, that there are two verses in today's passage that can be seen as a summary. Do to others as you would have them do to you. That has to do with our behavior. And then verse 36, be merciful just as your Father is merciful. That to me is a higher power. Yeah, you do to others as you would have them do to you, but on your own, that does seem impossible. But when we remember that we have been forgiven, that can empower us to be forgiving of others. This is a challenge, and I'll stop with that.
I'm thinking about Jesus' parable about the servants to whom each is given a portion of the wealth of the landholder, and they choose to do different things with it. To whom much is given, much will be expected, is kind of the thought of that particular passage. And I'm thinking about, how do we measure what we're given? Do we measure it in justice, or do we measure it in grace? And are we affording that same wealth to someone else? My notes here, I said we are the hands and feet of God. The question of how we might be a blessing to others is coming to mind. So I see the golden rule here, and the golden rule is usually paraphrased, do unto others as they do unto you. And Jesus shifts that by adding the word want, would want. So it is do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And I think this is interesting because Jesus asks us to respond and not react. And I said this dovetails nicely into the second law that we were given by Jesus, and it's love your neighbor as yourself. So, Don, what are your thoughts? How does shifting the golden rule make it more difficult?
I think recognizing that it makes it very difficult. I'm thinking we dedicate 45 to 50 minutes to our conversation each week, and this is too much for 45 minutes. And I'm not saying that to run away from it, but I think it's a call for lifelong commitment and listening and very, very hard prayer. What's prayed for, in a quick discussion like this is seemingly impossible, and to your point, Bill, can't do it on our own, but also there's a promise here that it is possible, and there's a tangibility to it. These are breakthrough behaviors that we can see. And the trick is, how do you transform it from hope to action to make it tangible? And from the complex to the specific, because I think of this in very complex terms, in terms of codes in a well-ordered society, and Jesus is calling on something that's a matter of the heart and daily relationships, and recognizing that it's something that we all have to deal with. And what I wanted to raise up is and I'm raising this up as a question. I'm not certain about this, but that we have to examine it. What retribution looks like, what vengeance looks like, what valuing and worshiping a code, not knowing its source sometimes, means to other people. And I want to hold up. I finally had a chance to hear the oratorio considering Matthew Shepard this weekend. Craig Hella Johnson's piece, Charlotte Master Chorale performed it. And I won't get into the facts of the story. It's known to many people that Matthew was tied to a fence and beaten, and he eventually died. And for many terrible assumptions and terrible reasons and terrible brokenness. But I want to hold up that I think this is also a call that this is not just hard prayer and a promise that the world can be transformed and that we can see it and feel it when we do it. I think we have to look, and maybe that's the hardest part. And in the oratorio, I'm just going to quote just a bit of it. Right in the center, there's a section called "Keep It Away from Me," where don't want to look on the scene, to meditate about what we do to each other. And it says, don't want to look on this, never get near, flames too raw for me, grief too deep. Keep it away from me. Stay out of my heart. Stay out of my hope. Some son, somebody's pain, some child gone, child never mine. Born to this trouble, I don't want to be born to this world. And skipping ahead, close up the gates of night. Keep it all away from me. And I think I sure want to look away from the terrible things that we do. And I'm not doing that to look at others and to look at history, but I think it's a call. What Jesus is doing is to meditate upon the simplicity of the things that can be done, the quickness, the word, the isolation, the callousness, the lack of thoughtfulness before we respond or before we isolate people. And I think there's a call for, at least for me, looking in my heart, of it's easy to make a throwaway statement and never visit it again. But it's a call to look on the people that might have harmed is a lot of hard work. So hard prayer and hard work from a complex idea, I think, to a specific idea. And from thinking about the insertion of love in this way as creating chaos. And I don't know about you, but I can hear the voices of people saying, there's something chaotic about this passage. If you do these things, it creates instability. How do we get from the instability to looking on what life is and turning it from chaos to peace? That's what I've got, Sarah.
Thank you, Don. Charles, do you want to throw anything in?
Pass. Thank you.
I agree with you. This is hard. I think it's easier to remove myself and make someone shallow and two-dimensional, almost demonizing them and allowing me to escape from considering them as a whole, beloved human being. And I would say as a society, we find that easy to do. So my third question, how do these new laws of grace, I'm going to call them that, influence how we hear and respond to the promise God made Abraham and in turn made to us? I will bless you so that you will be a blessing to others, which makes us contagious agents of grace, which in and of itself is a thoughtful line to consider. Bill, you want to start us off?
First of all, in this age of pandemic, the word contagious, I chuckled because obviously you're kind of flipping the meaning. But I think we are called to be contagious. Sarah. And I think another way to say it is everything I say and do is contagious. It influences other people, not to control them, and I'm influenced by how other people speak to me. And I like this question, especially third in line, that we are called to be a blessing to others. And Jesus is saying that blessing is in being contagious agents of grace and forgiveness. Now, we sometimes scholars speak of what Jesus is offering as counterculture. I think it's more than that. It's not just counterculture, it's a new culture. And back to your point, Don, I think this is extremely difficult. And in that vein, Charles, I appreciate your honesty in acknowledging that in human relationships, especially daily close relationships, it is difficult. I think all of us can identify with that. I thought of some examples, Charles, as you were sharing your story. There are some people living rent-free in my head because of my concern or resentment or whatever. So I got a lot of work to do. Caroline Lewis, in one of her blogs on this, says that what we're called to do is to model who God is, and we're to model that to the world. Your image contagious, Sarah. That sounds brash, but that's the essence of this, and that's what makes it difficult. We are to model for others who God is, and this involves our choosing, and as I've already said, a power beyond ourselves, a higher power. And 1 John 4:19 reminds us we love because God first loved us. And back to 1 John 3:14, we know that we have passed from death to life because we love one another. Whoever does not love abides in death. That is powerful imagery, that if we want to live on the level of retribution, and even if we want to park at reciprocity, we're not there. And this is powerful image. We have passed from death to life if we love. If we do not love, we are abiding in death. Now, I found in my notes a litany that I used years ago that takes the portions of this. I'm not going to read the whole litany, but it takes portions of this scripture, and the leader reads them, and then the people respond, "Oh Lord, empower me to respond in otherworldly ways." There's that litany of each part of this. It's, Lord, help me. And I will end with what you've emphasized several times, Sarah, and you emphasized it as you read this passage. It begins by, it doesn't say, I say to you listeners. It says, I say to you that listen, those who are listening. I think it's Mark Davis makes a difference between hearing and listening. I can hear, but if I'm listening, I'm somehow engaging with it. I think that's the key. Are we listening? Thank you for the question, Sarah.
You're welcome. Don, how are we to be a blessing to others with these new...
Enjoy the interplay of the I and the we in this discussion. I'm not quite sure I know what to make of it, but there's something very collective about this. I think collective in terms of the viral nature of what's going on. Sarah, I like that language. But it also requires the personal, the self-examination as well. And I like the interplay of that. I'm going to, I think I'll just respond by reading a prayer that I recently heard. It was written by Nikki Zimmerman, who's a pastoral resident at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Charlotte. And she was preaching on actually on Galatians, but I thought this ties together the comments that we're talking about. And she wrote it as a prayer of the people. And so we've got the we here, but you could also read it with the I. And I'm just going to pull out a few comments. And you can imagine a whole congregation or a whole group of people praying it. And then for me, it drew me into myself to look, to not look away from culture, from my own heart, from the headlines, from the throwaway words that I have, to not look away. It's a big call to that. So I'm just going to read this, and this will be my response. So Nikki wrote this, and she gave me permission to use it. God of grace, hand us a mirror so that we may see ourselves for who we really are. Wipe away the blurry facade of self-importance so that we may properly evaluate ourselves in your gentle presence. Forgive us for perverting the gospel, opting for guidelines instead of grace. Forgive us for watering down the gospel, favoring resignation instead of refinement. Forgive us for dissecting the gospel, compartmentalizing grace instead of being consumed by it. Rid us of our selfish preoccupations, instill in us a desire to acquire humility. Guide us to the liberation that greets us when we see ourselves in our neighbor's need. Through Christ our Lord, we pray. That's my response.
Beautiful. Charles, what are your thoughts about this?
I think I'll pass. Thank you.
So I spent some time thinking about being hands and feet. Hands and feet often are invisible, right? The magician's good work happens when you're looking at one hand and the other hand is doing something magical. Oftentimes when we're moving, our feet are invisible, but we're moving. So how do we do this? How are we blessings to others? Loving our neighbor, doing good, giving freely, sharing our abundance, as we would want someone to share with us. I think about sending my kids, my young adult kids, out into the world, and I can only say I hope someone treats them like I would want to be treated, or that I would treat someone else's child that came to my door and was welcome into my home. And I think about how we share with each other, with our family, with our tribe, with our clan, our congregation, and our community. I like the idea of outwitted. I like that poem that you presented, Bill, because it's we often draw lines of separation. How do we draw lines of inclusion? And maybe the language is, if you are breathing, you are my brother. Jesus asks us to move past our emotional and instinctual reactions and to respond with liberation and love. And that's hard. It is so much easier to react and walk away instead of respond and start picking up the mess with someone else. I think the instruction here is not to be passive. And I think people often, hear these words and think passiveness is the request, and it's not passive at all. It's engage, but act in a way that we can invite the aggressor to look at us more closely and see us as neighbor. I think that's the tricky wicket. Brian Stoffergen was quoting Tannenhill, and I paraphrased. So I'm struck by how hard this is, and it's more difficult with the people we love the most. It's often easier with people we don't know well. And I thought about that, and it goes back to that retribution, reciprocity, and disregard, that idea that my needs might be more valuable in some capacity than someone else's. So this is a passage that continues to work on me. That's all I got, Don.
Well, great. Thank you for those questions. And Palma Sia Presbyterian Church is located at 3501 West San Jose. That's in Tampa, Florida. And they make this possible. And we thank all of you for listening in. And for those of you viewing, it's nice to see you. And Palma Sia can be reached through palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. We always share that because it's a resource. Great sermons, outstanding music, prayers, reflections, discussions of Scripture, good debate, good disagreements, and the opportunity to take communion as well. And you're always welcome. And we'll see you next time.